Hello lovers of Westeros, I'm Ashley of Naath, and today I'm bringing you a video on my least liked character, Sansa Stark. This video will explain in part why I dislike the character as much as I do, and no, this isn't a roast. In Season 7, Episode 1, Sansa tells Jon that she's learned a great deal from Cersei. This video will examine that statement, and I will expose all the ways that Sansa is the Lion's Apprentice. So, if you want to hear her roar, just keep watching. The Lion's Apprentice starts scheming as quick as she can. In Season 6, Episode 4, Sansa is reunited with Jon after Brienne and Pod escort her to the wall. She starts out nice enough, begging Jon to forgive her for how she treated him when they were kids. Jon does forgive her and things seem well. But this moment was fleeting because Sansa immediately sets in on Jon. She asks Jon where he'll go, and Jon corrects her, saying, "Where will we go?" Sansa says there's only one place they can go, home to Winterfell. Jon says they can't just tell the Boltons to pack up and leave, and then Sansa delivers the uppercut and shows her hand. She says they'll take it back. From this moment on, Sansa has been nothing but a problem and grew into a master schemer that would have made her mother proud. She traps Jon in a death roll, pressuring Jon to force the free folk he rescued to fight for him against the Boltons. Rightly so, Jon objects, saying he didn't bring them south to serve him. As one could expect, Sansa projects her entitled attitude onto Jon, telling Jon that the free folk owe him. Now, if she had a shred of decency, she'd know you help people because it's the right thing to do, and you don't make your help contingent upon others doing things for you. But this is Sansa we're talking about, so nobody should expect too much. Sansa basically continues pressuring Jon, saying Winterfell is theirs and they'll never be safe so long as the Boltons hold it. Jon confides that since leaving Winterfell, his life has been nothing but a fight and he's tired of it. Incredulous and unrelenting, Sansa says she'll take it back herself if she has to. Now, you know and I know that this girl, who was too weak to cross a cold river to escape rape and torture and getting flayed alive, is not going to retake Winterfell on her own. I think Sansa knows this too, and this is why she becomes a manipulative little lioness going forward. Further on in this same episode, Jon receives a letter supposedly from Ramsay. The cameras zero in on the letter before Jon opens it, focusing on the wax seal, which appears to be deep red pink in the center and bright red around the edges with a large flayed man in the center. Keep this description in mind, it'll be important, and I'm coming back to it in a moment. Moving along, the letter reads as follows. To the traitor and bastard Jon Snow, you allowed thousands of wildlings past the wall. You have betrayed your own kind. You have betrayed the North. Winterfell is mine, bastard. Come and see. Your brother Rickon is in my dungeon. His direwolf skin is on my floor. Come and see. I want my bride back. Send her to me, bastard, and I will not trouble you or your wildling lovers. Keep her from me, and I will ride north and slaughter every wildling, man, woman, and babe living under your protection. You will watch as I skin them living. You will watch as my soldiers take turns raping your sister. You will watch as my dogs devour your wild little brother. Then I will spoon your eyes from their sockets and let my dogs do the rest. Come and see. Ramsay Bolton, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. Now, the first thing I want to mention is when Jon begins reading and says, to the traitor and bastard Jon Snow. The camera pans to Sansa, and when those words are said, she averts her eyes from Jon. Seemingly, her demeanor was a mix of, oh shit, this is happening, and shame of calling her brother those names. But she choked down her shame because she wrote this letter and had to A, make it sound like Ramsay's words, and B, ensure the letter served its purpose. We know Sansa's purpose is to by proxy reclaim Winterfell. She claimed she'd do it by herself, but she knows she can't, so Sansa will trick others into doing for her what she's unable to do for herself. Sansa was sure to include details she knew would give Jon no choice but to fight. Remember, Jon didn't want to fight for one more thing since that's all he's been doing. But what does Jon care about most in the world? His family. Remember again, Jon told Sansa that their father's ghost would come back and murder him if Jon didn't look out for her. So, Sansa made sure she explicitly threatened herself and Rickon in the letter to give Jon no choice but to fight to protect them. However, she couldn't stop there. Jon can't fight the Boltons himself. He needs an army. And we know Sansa has been pushing Jon to use the Free Folk to fight for him, but Jon won't ask them. So, Sansa was sure to threaten the Free Folk in the letter to get Tormund to decide to have the wildlings fight for Jon. All in a day's work, right? Also, Sansa was very confident about things the letter said, which she shouldn't have a way to know. How did she know that Ramsay killed Roose? She spoke on that with absolute certainty. She was also ultra-confident that Ramsay had Rickon prisoner. Which he did, but Sansa shouldn't have known this, so how could she have? 2 words, Peter Baelish. Lord Baelish arranged Sansa's marriage to Ramsay, so you can bet that he had a few well-placed spies in Winterfell if he was going to do business there. It is my belief that Littlefinger and Sansa were corresponding well before we saw it for the first time in Molestown. Now, you might say Sansa couldn't have wrote it because we saw a rider with a Bolton shield go to Castle Black immediately preceding the letter's delivery. And I'd agree with you, we did see that. But I ask you, if Ramsay had wrote this letter, why would he have sent a rider to deliver it? He has ravens at his disposal. It would make far more sense for Ramsay to have sent the letter that way. But for Littlefinger, who's camped out at Molestown, which is approximately 1.7 miles from Castle Black, a rider makes perfect sense. So it's my belief that Littlefinger and Sansa conspired together to make it seem like the letter was sent from Ramsay when it really came from Sansa. Still questioning my theory? I submit the most damning piece of evidence incriminating Sansa, the wax seal. This is the letter Jon received supposedly from Ramsay. This is the letter Balon Greyjoy received that accompanied Theon's cock in the box. We know this was beyond a doubt from Ramsay. Here's a side-by-side of both letters. As you can see, the wax is 2 completely different colors. Also, the flayed man symbol is 2 different sizes. The one we know for sure came from Ramsay is much smaller than the one used on Jon's letter. So I conclude that these letters came from 2 different people. It's also worth mentioning that further on in Season 6, we saw Sansa writing letters. This is what the wax seal she uses looks like. Note the color. Here's a side-by-side of Jon's letter from Ramsay and Sansa's letter we saw her write. To me, this is the exact same wax. Jon's letter looks darker in the middle, but that's because there's more wax, so the pigment is greater. But if you look at the edges of the seal where the wax is thinner, it's the same color as the wax on Sansa's letter. So now that we understand the logistics, we have to realize that beyond serving as a catalyst to get Jon and the Free Folk to fight Ramsay, Sansa's letter serves another purpose. It is the start of the cycle Sansa is setting Jon up for, the same cycle Littlefinger has set Sansa up in. Create a scenario to make someone depend on you so that you can solve their problem and look like a savior, thus indebting that person to you. The more high stakes the scenario, the better, because the higher the stakes are, the more your target will feel like they owe you. Put simply, chaos is a ladder. This concept of chaos governs all of Sansa's decisions going forward, as does something Littlefinger tells her. In Season 6, Episode 5, Sansa goes to Molestown to meet with him. He informs Sansa that he's ridden north with the Knights of the Vale, who are stationed at Moat Cailin, to come to her aid. He also tells Sansa that her great-uncle, Brynden the Blackfish, had gathered what remained of the Tully forces and retaken River Run. Littlefinger informs her that she might need an army loyal to her someday, so she should contact her uncle. Sansa responds that she has an army. Interesting choice of words here. It's almost as though she knew she'd need an army, so Sansa did what she had to do to secure one. Oh wait, she just wrote a letter tricking people into fighting the Boltons for her. How could I have forgot? Anyway, Littlefinger points out that the army is her brother's, not hers, and that Jon is her half-brother. It's this comment that put the icing on Sansa's chaotic cake. Sansa has always held herself in high regard. She thinks she's better than her siblings, Jon more than anyone because of his bastard status. So thoughts she already has have just been affirmed by Littlefinger. Jon doesn't deserve Winterfell, but as a legitimate child of Ned and Catelyn, she does. Everything Sansa does going forward is motivated by this. Sansa proves this point in Season 6, Episode 5 during Jon's War Council, which she had no place at, by the way. Davos lists the houses that declared for the Boltons. Sansa says the Karstarks declared for Ramsay without knowing they had another choice. And Davos points out that Robb beheaded their father, so they can't count on the Karstarks joining their cause. Sansa begins chastising Davos, full of her own crap, overestimating her intelligence. Even Jon is appalled at her. Sansa claims Northmen are different, that they're more loyal, and Davos counters that the most loyal of men don't want to see their wives and children skinned for a lost cause, that they need to be convinced it's a fight they can win. Let's take a pause. This would have been the perfect time for Sansa to mention the Knights of the Vale, but she said nothing of them. Instead, all she says is that the North remembers, that they remember the Stark name, and that all the North would risk everything for it. Davos agrees, but says Jon doesn't have the Stark name. Then Sansa shows her ass and proves that she thinks herself above Jon. She says aloud, "No, but I do." Shocked, everyone in the council looks at her disgusted. Then Sansa realizes what she did, so she tries to cover her ass by saying Jon is just as much Ned's son as Ramsay is Roose Bolton's. Then Sansa actually does something right and mentions the Tully army and that the Blackfish reformed it. But, as usual, Sansa does what Sansa does, and she lied about how she knows the information. This just goes to show you that Sansa is really disloyal. Sansa thinks she's smarter than she is, she only wants to help Jon if it benefits her, and she won't even be honest about all their potential allies and allow Jon and those at council experienced in the ways of war to make decisions about how to use them. Instead, she says nothing of substance and spews a lot of hot air to make herself feel important. But what should we expect? It's Sansa we're talking about. Keeping these factors in mind, let's look at what Sansa does, or rather doesn't do, next. Tormund has 2,000 fighting men to Ramsay's 5,000. So Jon needs more men. He, Sansa, and Davos visit several northern houses to try and strengthen their military. Lyanna Mormont is ride or die for House Stark, so she joins their cause and cuts Sansa down in the process, which was pretty funny. However, House Mormont only pledges 62 men to the cause, so the recruitment campaign must continue. Later on in Season 6, Episode 7, the trio visits with Lord Glover and the following exchange occurs. Jon asks Lord Glover to hear them out, and Lord Glover responds, "I've heard enough. We've only just taken back this castle from the Ironborn, and the Boltons helped us do it. Now you want me to fight against them. I could be skinned for even talking to you." Jon responds that the Boltons are traitors, and Lord Glover asks, "Have other northern houses pledged to fight for you?" Jon answers with House Mormont, to which Lord Glover asks, "And?" Jon begins to list the houses they sent ravens to, then Lord Glover cuts him off, saying, "You're asking me to join your army. Who's fighting in this army?" Jon admits that most of their forces were comprised of wildlings. This makes Lord Glover laugh. He says the rumors are true, but he hadn't dared believe them. He said he received Jon out of respect for Ned, but House Glover would not abandon their ancestral seat to fight beside wildlings. Now, throughout this entire scene, as Jon is getting chastised and embarrassed, Sansa remains quiet. Clearly, Lord Glover has an issue allying with the Free Folk and won't help House Stark because they have. Wouldn't this have been the perfect time for Sansa to say the Knights of the Vale had ridden north to fight beside House Stark, to give Lord Glover an alternative ally to fight beside, an ally he'd respect? But Sansa says nothing of them. Remember, she needs to be the solution to the chaos. This means Jon can't have too many allies going into the battle. She needs Jon to come close to losing so she can send in the Knights of the Vale at the last moment so Jon and everyone else thinks Sansa is responsible for the victory. Also, if Sansa waited to bring in the Knights of the Vale long enough, Jon might die and her path of ascension to Lady of Winterfell would be clear. Cersei Lannister would be so proud. Before the Battle of the Bastards, Sansa gives a repeat performance in a war council she has no place in. She completely gives up on rescuing Rickon, resigning him to death. This in and of itself is very telling about the type of person Sansa is. None of the other Stark siblings would give up on each other, but here's Sansa ready to condemn one to death and smile while doing it. One brother down, one to go, right? Then she bitches at Jon for not including her in the battle plans. Jon asks Sansa what she thinks, and she literally gives him no advice beyond telling him not to do what Ramsay wants him to do. She is so full of shit, I can't stand her, but I digress. Jon as much as tells her the same, and Sansa pathetically says, I would have told you not to attack Winterfell until we had a larger force, or is that not obvious too? And Jon says, screaming, when will we have a larger force? We've pleaded with every house that will have us. The Blackfish can't help us. We're lucky to have this many men. Sansa screams again that it's not enough, and Jon ends it by saying it's what they have. Let's take another pause. Why isn't Sansa saying anything? Now more than ever is the time to speak up about the Knights of the Vale. Hell, Jon outright asks Sansa when they will have more men, yet she won't tell him. Instead, Sansa would rather scream at Jon and bitch that nobody listens to her. This is at least the 4th time she chose not to share the alliance with the Knights of the Vale. War Council at Castle Black. Private conversation with Jon after visiting Bear Island. The meeting with Lord Glover. And this very conversation. Not to mention any time between these occasions. This is why I say Sansa brought in the Knights of the Vale as part of a conspiracy to elevate herself and give the appearance of saving the day. Had it been otherwise, she would have opened her mouth. Instead, Sansa waited to bring them in until the very last moment as she sat atop her horse watching in full view of everyone on the battlefield. Unfortunately for this Lion's Apprentice, the men rallied for Jon, who fought for and bled with them. So this has been a recap of Sansa's actions in Season 6, all of which indicate she has learned a thing or two from Cersei, just as she claimed. She's even taken a page out of Littlefinger's playbook. When you stop and think about Sansa's influences, Lady Catelyn, Cersei, and Littlefinger, it's remarkable that Sansa isn't worse than what we've seen. That being said, The Lion's Apprentice isn't done yet. Sansa's manipulation continues into Season 7, and I will cover that in The Lion's Apprentice Part 2, so stay tuned. I am Ashley of Naath. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and join my Khalasar. To my Blood Riders, my Khalasar, and everyone watching, I hope you have a wonderful day, and from me to you, 7 blessings, friends.